Welcome back. Cornversations, episode 11. Welcome back if you are a returning listener. If you're a first-time listener, welcome in. Either way, very glad to have you here and listening to us. If you are new or if you're somebody who has not done so yet, would really appreciate the likes and subscribes on social media. We are on all platforms: Facebook, X at KBEX_ATC, Instagram at cornversationspod. And if you want to interact with the podcast, send a mailbag question to cornversationspod@gmail.com. We are on all of the major listening platforms: Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio. So go ahead and give us a like and a subscribe on those platforms. And if there are any platforms you're listening to or you would prefer to listen to that we are not on today, send us a mail and we will do our best to get on that platform as quickly as possible. It is all about the listeners. So what you guys do and how you interact with us is really what keeps this going and what is going to help this grow. Got a big week that has happened in the sports world. Got a packed show once again. So not a lot of time to dilly-dally here. The big topics of the week and what we're going to cover this week, a couple of college football aspects. We've got some interesting comments that have been made by coaches going into big games this weekend. And we're going to shift to what was actually a mailbag question originally that I unfortunately passed over. And we're going to circle back around and hit that up. It's about the coaching carousel in college football. And then we are going to talk a little bit about the landmark decision that has been made by America's fifth major pro sports league. And we'll see how that impacts what could happen with that league going forward. So, packed show, really excited to start talking about it, but I am even more excited to, for the second week in a row, introduce a guest on Cornversations, and that's really what it's all about. So this week, I've got my buddy Michael with me. Michael, appreciate you joining.
Oh, as a longtime listener and first time caller, this is a true delight to be here on Conversations.
Well, I am truly delighted to have you on as well. And I think it makes sense that you're on because for readers of Around the Corn Sports blog, he is also the guest prognosticator this week for college football games. So it makes sense that we're talking college football here. Go and check out the article for week 12 that is already posted on Around the Corn Sports blog. Michael put a ton of effort in there this week. So I think he's got some good things to say, and hopefully you get a laugh out of some of that as well. I certainly did.
Oh, I knew I was going to hang with the big dog as UK Bex, and I was like, what would Kyle do? And here I am.
Well, I appreciate it. Well, Michael, the first topic that I wanted to bring up, I think probably hits pretty close to home for you because it was a comment made by your guy, Pat Narduzzi. And they've got a pretty big game coming up this weekend, the Panthers against Notre Dame. And prior to the game, earlier in the week, Narduzzi had a very interesting response to a question about how much this game means to Pitt in their season moving forward. So the question, just for the listeners here so that we're on the same page, was to Narduzzi, do you feel like it's a must win for the team when it comes to the playoff? And the question was in reference to this weekend's game against Notre Dame. And Narduzzi's quote was, absolutely not. It is not an ACC game. I'm glad you brought that up. It's not an ACC game. I'd gladly get beat 103 or 110 to 10 in that game. They can put 100 up on us as long as we win the next two after that. But again, our focus is on Notre Dame and getting as many wins as we can. Quite the bombshell there, I think, from a guy who has I mean, you tell me, Mike, because you are a Pitt fan. I think he's kind of been, a little bit of a controversial guy to begin with as head coach there. And now he's bringing these comments up ahead of what is essentially the biggest game that the Panthers have played this season. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, I think when game day's coming, you're retiring Aaron Donald's jersey. There's a sold out crowd at Heinz Field, Extra Stadium, whatever it's called now. 66,000 something something is what they hold. I know 2 years ago when they played West Virginia, that broke the Acrisure Stadium record for most fans. And then now, again, this game where you're ranked in the top 23 or top 25, the number 23, you go, you beat a top 10 team in Notre Dame, and you probably find yourself in that playoff picture. And as I call him, Nardufus goes and says, nah, this doesn't matter. I get what he's saying that the ACC games punched in their ticket. If they win those out and they win the championship, they're in. But I just can't imagine going to the locker room the next day like, hey guys, let's get a tough practice in because this game does not matter.
Yeah, I mean, he mentioned, I think, in a different question that he feels like the locker room is insulated. And I think what he meant by that is that they're not hearing it the same way as maybe the fans are taking it, in terms of, hey, we don't want to win this game, or that this game doesn't matter. Um, I don't know, whether that is true, right? I mean, these are 18 to 22-year-old kids, so they're going to hear things, whether they are told something in the locker room and actually believe it, or if they're hearing what's going on outside the locker room and then coming to their own opinions, is really anybody's guess. But I, I think this is kind of a violation of Coach Speak 101, right? You don't say this in public. Frankly speaking, I think he's right. And actually, that is kind of something that I want to get into maybe a little bit more deeply about this. But you just simply don't say it so bluntly in the media.
No, and Pat is a very folksy, you know, average Joe kind of guy where he's like, yeah, he is telling them like this doesn't matter. We could lose by 100, and Vegas says he might be onto something. There's a 12.5 dog at home, so maybe it will be 100-50, and it'd just be Jeremiah Love running all over him and CJ Carr throwing 5 touchdown passes. But I mean, I think comparing what he said to Marcus Freeman, it kind of shows like who's the leader and how you coach is like, oh, Narduzzi's one of the guys, and Marcus Freeman gives the like CEO Mike Tomlin kind of vibe where, yeah, he's a player coach, but he's still a businessman at the end of the day. I like what Freeman said when they're like, "Is this a trap game?" And he's like, "This is the quote here." He's like, "As I was reminded yesterday, somebody texted me, is this a trap game?" I said, "This is not a trap game. This is a challenge, a real challenge, a great challenge." And so we have to understand the challenge that we have ahead of us on Saturday. And I think that sounds much better than what Pat Narduzzi said. You could even just distill that a little bit into your answer, Pat, to go along with your 100-0 loss, and it would still sound 1,000 times better.
Right. Right. And in fairness, Marcus Freeman's comments are really more in line with the reality of their situation as well, which is that they have to win this game. Pitt really doesn't. I mean, in theory, if Pitt wins the next two games, like Narduzzi was suggesting, they're getting into the ACC title game. They've got a shot to get in via that route, as opposed to a situation where they could get in as maybe an at-large. But I mean, here's a theory or a thought experiment. If they were to beat Notre Dame, right, and then between the Georgia Tech game the week afterwards and the Miami game to end the regular season, they split those games. Chances are they're probably not playing in the ACC title game, but they've got 3 losses at that point, right? Three
Yes.
losses. And you're looking at a team who just beat a Notre Dame team that is probably going to the playoff if they win this game. But if they lose one of those 2 next games, they don't get into the ACC title game. They're probably not getting into the playoff either.
No, and that's my nightmare scenario. I mean, I think as someone who's watched many years of Pitt football, basketball, women's basketball, volleyball, all the sports, I think it's very likely a pitting will occur. That's what we call when Pitt loses, a pitting. They beat Notre Dame, and you're like, wow, we're finally over the hump. This is going to be great. They lose to either Georgia Tech or Miami and then miss out on the ACC championship, and they go play in some random bowl game that does not matter, and you just think about what if. I mean, that Louisville game, one of the worst calls I've ever seen in my life on a fair catch punt. Guy obviously waves the fair catch. Louisville player runs into their returner, Kenny Johnson, fumble, Louisville touchdown, back in the game. The West Virginia game, just a rivalry game. I think Pitt had 200 more yards than West Virginia, but turnovers and penalties costing that game. So it's like, all right, that was just a weird one versus a fierce rival. So you kind of scratch that off. But then, like you said, once you hit that 3-loss mark, it's over. That's kind of what Marcus Freeman's saying here. I mean, they play Syracuse and Stanford next, but all credit to those teams. I think those are 2 wins as well. So I think they're going to be ready off the bus. They're going to be ready to go and show the committee that they are a serious team and not the team that lost at the beginning of the year.
Right. And maybe Narduzzi's comments are simply, digging at old wounds for Pitt fans. I mean, there have been opportunities in the past where they haven't been able to capitalize. And so making such a blunt statement about the reality of this game probably just rubs those fans the wrong way. But looking at it from a different perspective, and I'm not a big tinfoil cap guy, but I've had this conversation with people offline a number of times about Ohio State's season last year, and they lose the final game against Michigan, and they don't make the Big Ten title game as a result, but they put themselves still in a position to get to the playoff, and they rip right through it, right? And they don't have to play that extra game against Penn State in the Big Ten title game. They can just get ready for what is really the ultimate prize, which is the national title game. And all of the Ohio State fans and probably some Michigan fans would hate me for saying this, but the reality is that that game, the game, doesn't have the same level of importance at the end of the season in most instances that it did when it was an opportunity to go to the Rose Bowl. The reality is that the landscape of college football has changed. And to Narduzzi's point, if he can find a way to get into the playoff, he's going to find or probably want to take the path of least resistance. I mean, we saw it last year in the conference where Clemson essentially backed in and got themselves into the playoff by winning the ACC title game. And
Well,
I just wonder, I mean, is it a situation where you're going to start to see this happening more and more? Maybe you won't hear it necessarily from the coaches because I think, there are a lot more guys who are going to play the Marcus Freeman game in front of the mic as opposed to what Narduzzi said. But in reality, is this what we're starting to see in college football, especially as you get into the November month and you start to have a little bit more clarity as to how things can shake out?
let me run this by you, Kyle. So let's say Pitt loses 55-10 to Notre Dame, right? Then they beat Georgia Tech. They beat Miami. They win the ACC title game. And let's say it's against like SMU or again Georgia Tech, another like rematch, or Virginia, who's 5-1 in the conference. They win the title. Could the playoff committee say, well, you do have a weak conference this year. Miami's not as strong as we thought they were going to be. They would have 3 losses at that point as well. No ACC team in the title game. Maybe it's a Georgia Tech team that would go with 2 losses over 3-loss Pitt unless they lost them in the championship. I mean, we saw, again, it's a different system now, but 13-0 Florida State be like, no, you're missing your star quarterback. You're out. Could you see the committee doing something like that and choosing another SEC team over the ACC champion?
By way of the rules that the ACC does get an automatic bid to the playoff, I would say no. However, it's a good question to bring up because if this type of situation starts to happen year in and year out, and I do think it will. I mean, we saw it last year. We're seeing it this year. We're probably going to see it in the future. Then perhaps the structure of the playoff, which is that the Power Four conferences do get an automatic bid, and then you're giving one G5 conference an automatic berth, and then the rest of them are your at large bids. Perhaps that does get changed as a result of this. And I could see that happening if the powers that be determine that you have to maintain the sanctity of the regular season in college football, because I think to some extent you do. I mean, this is a rivalry game. Notre Dame and Pitt is a rivalry game. It's not maybe Ohio State, Michigan, but it is a game that people look at and they say, yeah, these two teams should both be wanting to win, if only because they've wanted to win when they played each other five decades ago, right? And you do need to maintain that sanctity of college football because essentially that's what separates it from the pro leagues at this point. And if you don't have that anymore, I think that you could lose the soul, if you will, of college football. And so, no, I mean, I don't see that happening this year with Pitt, but could it be a situation in the future if this continues to happen where people say, all right, this is enough. we need to change the structure of how we're allotting bids to the playoff in order to make sure that these types of games that are being played in November still maintain some level of relevance, as far as the coaches are concerned.
All right, one more question as a pit downer, just in case. Got to cover all my bases. So
Yeah.
then again, they go into the ACC championship. Let's say they win out 3 wins against top 15 opponents to close the season, lose in the championship to whoever the ACC champion becomes. Would it be feasible for an at-large bid, or do you think it's like, no, it's Pitt, you're not getting an at-large bid?
Um, yeah. I mean, I would err towards no, them not getting in. I think if they do beat Notre Dame this weekend, they're probably going to jump up 5, 6, but you never know. I mean, the playoff committee has done some interesting things when these types of games have happened in the past. Maybe they would drop or jump up 8 spots or so, or 9 spots, and get like right outside of the top 12. But assuming that it's somewhere more in the range of like 5 to 6, and they're sitting there at 17 or 18, and then they win those last 2 games, they're probably going to be right on the cusp. And if they
Hmm.
lose that ACC title game, I think you could have a situation where they could be like the first or second team out. I mean, the reality is they're going to have to beat likely 3 ranked teams in a row to get to that ACC title game. If we're also assuming they're going to beat Notre Dame, that's a pretty tough schedule in November. So I think there should be level of some level of accolades that are recognized there for that. But I think that you're looking at a brand situation at that point. I mean, who else is going to be there, right? Is there going
Hmm.
to be 2 or 3 other SEC teams, looming right behind them or right in front of them that might get the nod over an ACC team, especially with the way that the ACC has been perceived as a whole this year?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the last Week 12 projection. So if you want to just run down here and we can see like who they would kick out for Pitt, let's just pretend that things stay where they are. I'm sure teams play each other and it won't be like this. But it's Ohio State 1, Indiana 2, Texas A&M 3, Bama 4, 5 is Georgia, 6 is Texas Tech, 7 is Ole Miss, 10 is Texas, 11 Miami. I feel like they're kind of circling that 11 spot for whoever wins the ACC regardless. Notre Dame is 9, if I did not say them. Then we have South Florida at 12. And, I think it has to be ACC or bust.
Yeah, and the Miami Pitt game is essentially an elimination game, and so is the Georgia Tech one. As far as an at-large bid is concerned, I think the loser of those 2 games is going to fall back enough where it's going to be hard for them to get that at large, especially with some of the other SEC teams, what they've got left. I mean, I could see a situation where a Texas A&M, for example, loses maybe 1 or even 2 games if they get to the SEC title game and still is in the playoff. At this point, I would say, barring some massive upset of the Aggies, they're probably as safe as anybody at this point, given where they're at right now.
For sure. I was just about to say, I mean, you can't predict what the committee is going to do, but if you were on the committee, how do you weigh like the early season losses? Like, think like Notre Dame, 2 losses early in the season, Pitt with 2 losses early season to especially bad West Virginia opponent. But how do you kind of balance that of like, oh, this is what happened, but now Pitt's quarterbacks change, whole new team, whole new vibes. I mean, I feel like it's kind of like they look at it once they announce the first bracket for the playoff. They're kind of like, oh, now this is the season we're watching.
Right, for sure. And actually, it's a good point. Early season versus late season. Another potential solution to Narduzzi, making these comments, trying to avoid those in the future, is that instead of having this game in mid-November, you schedule it in early September when it does matter. I mean, because if you go back to a lot of these early season games with teams that are fighting for playoff spots right now, Texas, Ohio State, for example, there was no way that either Ohio State or Texas was going to say something to the degree of, yeah, we can lose by 100 in this game because in the end, it's not a Big Ten or an SEC battle. In the end, it's so early in the season, you feel like you have to win that game because you don't know what's going to happen the rest of the season. So, that's another solution to some of these things, maintaining the sanctity of, if you're talking rivalries or big matchups, is, maybe you try to front load them. And I'm not an advocate for scheduling, weak teams like FCS level teams at the end of the season as an opportunity to maybe get right from a health perspective, like some SEC teams have done in the past.
I
But
mean, Old
if
Miss played Citadel last week. I saw it on the bottom scroll. I'm like, that can't be right.
Right, exactly, and they're known for doing that. I mean, the SEC has been known for doing that for a while, and if you can replace some of the early season games like that, the tune-ups with these big ones, maybe you can maintain Notre Dame versus Pitt having an amount of relevance to the coaches as well, because they're sitting there going, yeah, we don't know where we're going to be in 7 weeks. So we feel like we have to win this game, as opposed to right now where Narduzzi's kind of looking at the odds and he's saying, okay, chances are, even if we lose this game, we still have a very legitimate path to getting to the playoff.
I think last thing I want to add before we move on from this, because I feel like we touched on a lot. One last Narduzzi quote from his radio show yesterday. He told a fan, "It's a noon start. Get liquored up." So, Kyle, what is your go-to drink when you're tailgating before a big game?
Oh, that's a good one. In college, we used to get a 30 rack of Rolling Rock, and
Oh,
I
rest
felt
in peace.
like, yeah, I felt like that was a go to. It's hard, I think, especially now in our old age, to go with the liquor early. So I guess, liquored up maybe might not be my go to, but yeah, I'm all for a nice pale ale
Oh
or
yeah, I
two
mean,
or three.
you know me, I don't drink beer. It's gross, makes me sick. And so liquor all day, a little mixed drink action. Going down with some friends who are all pit grads. They go to every game. They travel to games, and right before kickoff, they end it with a game of boom. And I just take my whole liquor bottle in that final cup, and somebody's gonna drink it.
There you go. There you go. I guess there is no bad way to do it, right?
No, not at all.
Right. Well, I agree. I think we've pretty much hit every angle of that topic we can. So shifting gears a little bit, and I do have to give a shout out to the listener who kind of inspired this next segment here. Brennan, you were a comment on one of the old episodes, and I'm sorry, I just totally missed over that a week ago. So you should have had an opportunity to hear your question on episode 10. But here we are with episode 11, and we're doing you one better. We're not just answering the question, we're going to make a whole segment out of it. But the question from Brennan was, what are your thoughts on all of the coaching openings, especially after LSU became open? And what we're going to do is we're going to actually do kind of a roundtable here. I would call it maybe a semi-rapid fire, if you will, about some of the openings in college football. And we have a number of them already, despite it still being regular season. There are 9 opening spots. We're going to definitely hit the main ones that I think people are most interested in. There's some big names right now, big programs that have openings. So, Michael, I know you did a ton of research on this, so I'm going to kind of let you lead the way on the commentary. But what I want to start off with, as far as the first program and what your thoughts are, we've got a big opening with that LSU spot, as Brennan mentioned. Who do you think might fill the role that Brian Kelly has left open and is now, well, he's still fighting with LSU right now for the money that he was contractually guaranteed?
Oh, I mean, I think the strangest part of this is you're seeing just a lot of blue bloods and like top tier programs, like teams with NIL money ready to throw at whatever coach comes in, having these openings. So I think that makes it even more unique than this year. So it's kind of like, do you want the proven track record? Do you want a young guy to build the program around? There's just so many ways these teams can go. And when you said, hey, we're going to talk a little bit about, you know, coaches that could go places, I kind of broke it down into 3 things. I said, the old meme format, tired, where it's like, oh, this kind of name everyone's throwing around could be good, could be bad. Inspired, where it's like, this is something interesting, something different. And then wired, which is just like something weird that everyone would just enjoy. So since we're starting with LSU, I know this guy here. Well, actually, I guess your guy. Well, I'll just do both of them because I know you're a big fan of Willie Friss. He's who I have in the inspired section. So I really think it comes down to him or Tulane head coach John Summerall. I'll start with Summerall. Betting favorite for Auburn, but why not LSU? Feels like a better job. I don't know what your thoughts on that are. He has a Louisiana background, of course, with Tulane, SEC recruiting grounds, and he's turned real players out of that school. I mean, Tajay Spears, third round pick, running back from the Titans a couple years back. Caleb Renshaw, DB in the third round this year. Got the BYU transfer, Jake Retzloff, to come to Tulane. So he knows what he's doing. He's 42 years old. He's a winner at Troy and Tulane. And then even on a little bit of SEC background in 2021, he was the defensive coordinator for the Kentucky Wildcats. They were 5-5, but number 4 on defense in the SEC. So then, kind of like same coin, but like a little bit different, is Willie Friss, who I call old man John Summerall, 65 years old. So maybe one last shot for him. You could maybe do an heir apparent kind of deal where he has his offensive coordinator Slade Nagel, who was a LSU tight end coach and special teams coordinator a couple of years back, or even assistant head coach Derek Sherman. Seems like a Fritz guy and has been following in his footsteps. He landed the top quarterback recruit in Keeson Henderson. I mean, sure, he's from Houston, but maybe he'll follow the coach. So, of those guys, I mean, do those make sense to you? Do you like one more than the other? Is there another guy you think could fill in those shoes?
Yeah, the Summerall pick is interesting to me. I would agree with you. I think I see him potentially going to a place like Auburn. The questions that I have as far as the LSU job, number one, do they want a guy who's known for the defensive side of the ball there? Obviously Brian Kelly was an offensive guy. I think that LSU has the funds to go after one of the big hitters on the offensive side. I just, it feels to me like they may want to go offense. And so I wonder whether Summerall is a guy that is, fitting the bill of what they're looking for. I think he could realistically do the job. I think he is a candidate for an SEC job for sure. I had my questions about whether or not he was going to be able to really keep things going at Tulane because, to your point about Willie Fritz, he was really the guy who brought Tulane back. And I think Fritz is one of the ultimate program builders. So when I think about Fritz, I think, okay, this is a guy who can take a program who is really down on their luck and bring them back to some level of relevance or competitiveness in a way that they haven't really done for a number of years. I mean, you saw that with Tulane. You're starting to see that with Houston. He does it quickly. That's the other thing, is it only takes them a couple of seasons. I just don't know whether or not LSU feels like they need a guy like that. I mean, Fritz is almost like a culture guy, if that makes sense. The one name you left out, and I think this is going to probably maybe help us segue into another job, is Lane Kiffin. I mean, I know everybody thinks he might be going for the Florida job, but could he be an LSU guy, perhaps?
I think Lane will take whatever the biggest check is and who gives him the most NIL money.
Okay. Well, let me segue it then because
Wait, can I give you one more LSU name before we go? Just to, because I think an interesting fact of LSU was the Louisiana governor coming out and being like, "Hey, this was terrible. Brian Kelly ruined us. It's costing taxpayers." So, have you ever seen the meme with Genevieve Kirk where she's like, "Sure, why the hell not?"
I don't think I have
Okay,
actually.
I'll send it to you afterwards, and it'll make sense for this pick. What about Ed Orgeron? Bring him back.
Oh my.
At
Oh my.
67, happily retired, got divorced this summer, had to pay $8 million in the settlement. He's so desperate for a job and a contract, he is pining openly for the Oregon State job. And I'm like, if you're doing that, you might as well go back to LSU for a couple years on the cheap, let them pay off the Kelly contract, and you move on from there.
Is that your wired pick?
That is my wired pick.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Why not? Why not? Give the old ball coach another swing at it, right?
hmm What's your
Okay.
pick then? Are you Team Lane to LSU then?
I'm 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 thinking that Lane is looking at staying at Ole Miss, or he's going to go somewhere else outside of Florida. So yeah, if I had to be put on the spot about it, I would say Lane Kiffin takes the LSU job. I think he's ready for something like that.
Oh, I mean, he's been ready. I mean, even the turnaround at Florida International, it's like, all right, Lane's learned his lesson. He's grown up. Lane Ball has been killing it in Old Miss. They're in the playoffs. They're developing talent. So, I mean, I think he's ready to go.
Yeah. Well, let's switch. Okay. How about Florida? Since we've been talking about potential guys.
I'm agreeing. I think it's Lane there. I don't know who else it could be besides Lane. I think that's their big game hunter. Like in that with that kind of token, like is he the best candidate in theory out there? Is Lincoln Riley going to leave USC? Eli Drinkwitz might be number two behind uh, Lane. I'm a big fan of Jeff Brom. I think he's been killing it at Louisville. So I think Lane's the belle of the ball. I do think at the end of the day he'll stay at Ole Miss, and he's just using this as a way to get a bigger paycheck. But as we discussed, ranked in the top 10 regularly with Ole Miss, and the resume speaks for itself. 13th in points per game this year. Probably could fix DJ Lagway, who was benched last week. And, I think the pieces are there. The NIL money, he gave that big quote where he's talking about blue bloods and saying that, it's no longer about facilities or practice fields. It's all about NIL revenue. And so he said that blue bloods have the advantage over everyone else in that department. So it seems like Florida is his choice. And he's in my tired tier as a good thing to be like everyone's talking about it. And I feel like it's lane or bust for them.
Okay. All right. How about some other names? I think you mentioned Eli Drinkwitz. I'm on the Drinkwitz train for Florida, so that would be my pick for them. I think that you look at what he's done at Missouri. He's basically taking care of business when they're expected to win. Something that I think some Florida coaches that we've seen in the past have failed to do. So, from the perspective of, can you get a guy who is going to come in and be consistent? And give you the wins that you expect, so that you're not blowing up week 5 trying to figure out how you're 3-2. I think he's a good choice there. I also think one thing that maybe he lacks at Missouri is that amount of money that they can throw at the issues, in a way where, instead of Missouri coming in as maybe 3-point dogs, right, as they've done a number of times since Drinkwitz has been there, and they're competitive too in these games, he's going to come in as a 6-point favorite instead. And I think he can win those games when they are the favorite. I mean, he's shown the ability to, keep guys mentally tough in close games. So I like Drinkwitz for Florida. I just wonder whether or not, they're done with trying to make a splash with a name that maybe isn't a guy like Lane Kiffin, for example, where everybody goes, yeah, that's the right pick. I mean, when was the last time that Florida has hired a guy where everybody says, yeah, that is the right pick for sure?
Steve Spurrier, maybe.
It's been, yeah, exactly. It's been a while. So perhaps Florida's done with that, and they're just going to bypass all of the fluff and try to go with somebody, that the masses think is the right pick. But
Yeah, I
I
think
don't know.
I got Drinkwitz for another SEC school. We'll talk about in a little bit here, but I do think he's the number 2 candidate if you take Lane number 1. A couple other names to throw at you from the wired category. You mentioned big game hunting. What about Jimbo Fisher? Is he coming back? Would you give him a shot if he was like, "Hey, I want to coach. I'm available. 60 years old, hasn't done it since 2023." Former Florida State national champion. Every time he's talked about, I just think about that story where he threw out his Christmas tree, and that's when we knew he was going to be leaving for Texas A&M. But I think that'd be an interesting name. Would you even entertain something like that if you were Florida?
If I was Florida, absolutely not. I think he comes with far too much baggage. I would not touch him with a 10-foot pole if I were the Gators. But yeah, I mean, the guy wants to get back into coaching, so he's going to end up somewhere. I just wonder if, Jimbo is in a situation now at this point in his career where, he just takes, you mentioned Lane Kiffin's early time at Florida Atlantic. He just takes one of these types of jobs, tries to get a team put together, kind of under the radar. And if we're still in a situation 3 or 4 years from now where you can build a team a la Kirk Cignetti, or you've got a team in one of those G5 conferences where you can run the table, if he just tries to get himself back into national relevance that direction, right? As opposed to trying to take the big job up front, which I think is going to be tough given kind of the reputation that he has at this point.
All right, I agree with that. I think he's now the college Bill Cowher, where every year is like there's a coaching search. You're like, oh well, Bill Cowher will leave CBS if he gets the right gig, and that gig never came. So I think Jimbo's kind of like, go coaching and recruiting kids in the NIL era, or make millions talking about ball. I'll take the latter. How about a young name for you in the inspired category? Maybe a little homer here, but I have seen what he's done, and I'm all about it. Pitt offensive coordinator Cade Bell, 38 years old, born in Gainesville, son of Kerwin Bell, the head coach at Western Carolina right now, who in his own right was literally a Florida Hall of Famer. He was a QB in the 80s, first team All SEC in 85, SEC Player of the Year of 84. Back to Cade now. He was the OC at Valdosta State in 2018, where they broke the D2 record for most points scored in the season, won the national championship. Then he joins his dad's staff at Western Carolina, keeps putting in top 10 numbers, gets the Pitt job, has Pitt scoring at will. They're averaging almost 40 points a game this year, sixth in the nation. And maybe I think the most important part for if he gets a coaching job somewhere, will he take freshman quarterback Mason Hineshell with him? He was a three-star recruit from the Toledo area that no one heard of. I think his best offer besides Pitt was Ohio U, but Cade Bell found him, fell in love, and now he's ready to ship with the Panthers. So I think if you're looking for someone outside the box, a little young, unconventional, it's Cade Bell.
I like that one. I don't know how much it's on the actual radar of Florida, but I like the connection. I think that your point about him finding a guy like Mason is important. I mean, it's not going to be as difficult at Florida to find those guys, buried beneath a bunch of other more highly rated recruits, but the ability to pick out that type of talent is, I think, something that maybe we've seen a lack of to some extent, at Florida, or at least being able to develop those guys or putting them in the right positions to succeed when they are there. So it's not a bad option. I think a lot of that probably depends on how hot does he really get, right? If Pitt continues to win and they are a team that is right around the playoff mark or actually sneaks in there this year, or maybe not even sneaks in there, maybe they qualify by way of winning the ACC. I think that's when you start to see names like that really start to gain some traction. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's more likely than Jimbo Fisher for sure. You mentioned earlier you had Eli Drinkwitz at a different SEC team. Let's shift gears. Who do you have Drinkwitz potentially going to?
I had him going to Auburn. He was
Okay.
on the national championship team in 2010 with Cam Newton and Gene Chizik. He was the quality coach coordinator, the quality control coach, or whatever they call that. And I mean, we talked about it with him. I mean, he's a winner everywhere he's been. He's 12-1 at App State, goes to Mizzou. They're 44-27. I will say he is 24-23 in the SEC, but that's life at Missouri. I'm sure the Mizzou fans are thrilled to be one game above 500 rather than 20 games under. One thing I thought was interesting, he's making $9 million right now at Missouri. So what's that number going to be to go to Auburn? Hugh Freeze is getting 6.5, which had his own deal before getting the job, and that buyout was 15 million. So is that feasible to pay another coach double figure digits to come coach their team after you just paid a $15 million buyout?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I guess the other question, and this is more looking at it from the perspective of a guy like Drinkwitz, how attractive is the Auburn job at this point relative to where he's at, which is, I think we both are kind of agreeing here, you have a little bit of a ceiling at Missouri. Do we feel like there is, unlimited potential at Auburn, or is this a situation where he might be trading, one contract for another, but in terms of actually getting to the point that he wants to get to, and he made a comment earlier this week about, hey, it's playoff or bust, right? It doesn't matter after you're out of it. If you're not in it at Auburn, is this really a step up for him or not?
No, I think you're spot on with that. Money cures everything. Ask Miles Garrett. And I think also, does he want to be a big fish in a small pond, or does he want to go to the big pond? And Auburn is the big pond. But if he takes, I'd be curious to see what would happen if Bull Purbuio didn't get hurt. Like if Missouri comes down here and they're a top 10 team in the playoff hunt with Bo, I think he stays at Auburn or stays at Missouri. But now, not middling is the right word when you lose your quarterback, but now not as in a strong position. You kind of look around and say, someone's offered me $15 million to go leave the job I have now, get the NIL money and the name brand of Auburn. I mean, I think it'd be at least he's taking a call and listening. It'd be dumb not to.
Right, right. And yeah, actually, to your point about the Prabula injury, had they had him for the entirety of the game against Vanderbilt, I think they probably win that game. And we're talking about an entirely different situation with Missouri right now. So it's a good point. I mean, this is a game of inches, and sometimes it's a game of luck as well. And that extends all the way up to who gets what contracts and what types of things can dictate where guys end up going. My thought for Auburn is Summerall. Actually,
Hmm.
I saw that his wife is an Auburn alum, and I believe
That
that he
changes
is from
everything now.
yeah, and I think he's from Huntsville as well. So he's an Alabama guy. And I just wonder whether, LSU might be a step ahead of where he's at right now, but getting to the SEC and giving it a shot at Auburn might be something that, he could swing. I know Auburn they've been through a kind of a plethora of guys, but they took Brian Harsin, right? And I wouldn't think that they would be above taking a swing on a guy from the American Conference either.
I was going to bring that up. I was wondering, 'cause, look at names that you sent a good list of like an article where they're kind of outlining who's out there and who's hearing names. And Harson was one, and I was like, I don't know. After the whole Auburn experience, I feel like you got to prove yourself a little bit more. And it's like I wonder if this leadership would be like, we did try the young guy before, and we need something more proven. Can I throw a couple other names at you that I thought would be interesting for here?
Yeah, go ahead.
What if they go down to Alabama and take Ryan Grubb or associate head coach Robert Gillespie? Steal from a rival. You're in the state. You know the players. I mean, I think Grubbs is a little bit less likely than Gillespie just because, he had that rough year in Seattle, then came back. It seems like he's a Kalen DeBoer disciple and he ain't leaving until it's worth it. But, Auburn would be worth it. But I think Gillespie, a little lesser known, came to Bama in 2021 with Saban. Won at every level. He was at Tennessee, North Carolina, known as one of the best recruiters in the country. Over his 17-year career, he's produced 10 NFL running backs. Running backs are his specialty. Alvin Kamara, Javante Williams, Michael Carter, just some of the guys he had in the last few years. So I think, anytime you can take from a rival and, hype up the fans, someone that knows the fertile lands of the recruiting trail, I think is always a good move.
I agree, and it's got my wheels turning about another program we're going to discuss here in just a little bit where I think a similar situation might happen. Again, I've got people listening to the show who are going to hate me for that take, but I love this one. I
I think
actually
we're on
do
the same
think
page, Kyle. I'm very excited.
I think we are. And yeah, I mean, if you're Auburn, I think that you have to look at all these options. And I think what you're saying about both of these guys is true. And in terms of, Grubb being a guy who maybe doesn't want to necessarily stick his neck out anymore until he feels like it's the right opportunity, you know, I I think the college game is probably where he belongs.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe an SEC head coaching job is the right opportunity for him. So I think those are nice. Those are spicy picks.
What team
So
next here?
why don't we just do that? Why don't we shift? Let's shift to Penn State because I think we are on the same page. Give me your thoughts here. Who are the guys?
Is my inspired pick here? I'm giving you the brainwaves. Is it Brian Hartline?
Yeah. Yep. I'm with you.
Can't
I
beat him,
think
join him, baby. They took the DC last year. You might as well snag the offensive coordinator this year.
Yep. Now, the local guys in Columbus, Ohio, they do not think that he's going to take a job like this, but I am kind of looking at it going, if not now, when, right? There have been instances in the past where he's been floated as the guy and he's, stuck to his guns, and they've got a really good thing going at Ohio State right now. And he, I think, is going to continue to be one of the top names who's going to come up for any coaching job, especially when you talk about the Midwest. But what he's been able to do as a recruiter at Ohio State is something I think that he can take with him wherever he goes. And you know, it's going to be a bit of a loss for Ohio State, but I've also talked with people, and their thought on Ohio State right now is that perhaps they're the new Alabama with Nick Saban, and what they mean by that is they're going to be a little bit of a carousel for the best and brightest in the game to kind of stop off for a couple of years, right? Have some success, build a little bit of a resume so that they can go and they can take a job like the Penn State job when it opens. And Hartline's maybe a little bit of a different situation because he's been with Ohio State for a while, but I think that's exactly what's been happening when he's been there or while he's been there, is that he's building this resume for a big time head coaching job. And Penn State, it's a Big Ten school. They've got some familiarity with hiring Ohio State guys. I know it hasn't necessarily worked out for them this year, but they're definitely willing to pay the money for it. And I think when you think about Penn State, there's a lot of guys who were floated out there as the main choices who have already signed their deals elsewhere. They've decided to stay put. So I like it. I'm with you. I think that's the top candidate that I look at for that job. I don't think he's the betting favorite right now, but in my mind, he makes the most sense.
And I think especially if you pay $50 million to kick out James Franklin, you need to swing big and get a winner and prove that you knew what you were doing. I mean, wide receiver Ohio State is because of Brian Hartline. It seems like you mentioned his recruiting record, even as the offensive coordinator. Maybe it's not the flashy numbers of we're only top 20 teams, but it's like Will Howard came from Kansas State, made him into a solid draft pick where Steeler fans think he's the future, and he had the number 14 offense with Howard, and then true freshman saying, is he a true freshman? I know he's a freshman, but he comes in and he's number 18 offense with a freshman quarterback. And it's just like, that's Brian Hartline doing the work. So if it's not him, I'd be struggling to see what they're looking for, and like you mentioned, like what other job would he want unless it's the NFL, which I don't think would call immediately. But I think he's the best choice. Can I give you some other sicko thoughts here?
Yes, but before you go there, the last thing I will say about Heartline, I feel like James Franklin was a rah-rah guy. He was a culture guy. He wanted to make sure that the guys were focused and ready to go. I always questioned, and I think a lot of people did, his in-game tactics. I think that Brian Hartline is a guy who, at the very least, people feel like he has the in-game tactic capability. He definitely has the recruiting capability. We've both touched on that. I think that's the one question that people have about him, and maybe he has about himself. If he's a confident guy, maybe he figures, hey, this is the time where I can prove to people that, I'm somebody who, is able to make these decisions. I look at it like almost like a Dan Lanning case, if you will, if Hartline is brash like him.
Oh yeah, you mentioned the Alabama idea, and I always thought of Saban when an assistant would leave. He's like, "You can leave, but you can't take like the O line coach or this quality coordinator guy because I have to fill that position." Are there some like lower level Ohio State coaches you could see him taking, and you'd be upset by some names that people might not be familiar with?
Oh, that's a good question. And I do think that there would be some of that going on, right? I mean, I wonder if he were to go, if he would almost hold off on doing that for maybe a year or so, but have that in the back of his mind, if that makes
No,
sense.
for sure.
And I it's tough to say, but yeah, I don't know that anybody would follow him immediately. But it's possible. I think it would be more likely that they're, kind of like shark's teeth, and that's how I really look at the the depth chart at Ohio State. You would just have somebody underneath him who kind of slides into his role or
Hmm.
takes, a role at Ohio State to be the next Brian Hartline, if that makes
I
sense.
mean, that's a sign of a good program, and Ohio State has proven time and time again they're a premier program.
But yeah, throw those names at me.
All right. So here in Pittsburgh, Allegheny County, large Penn State population. I believe it is the largest Penn State alumni population. So I hear all these thoughts every single day from friends and coworkers. A lot of former Nittany Lion candidates like Matt Rule, Manny Diaz, the offensive coordinator, Andy Kaltnick at Penn State. But I think they'll go retread route instead. What about Pat Fitzgerald or dare I say Urban Meyer?
I've heard the Urban Meyer thing thrown out. I I don't see him doing it. I think it's a similar situation to the Notre Dame job, and some of these other ones have been thrown out. And I don't know. I think Urban's done. Pat Fitzgerald's an interesting one. I think
Settle the
that,
lawsuit. He feels vindicated, he told reporters.
yeah, I honestly think that Penn State might be settling a little bit if they go after a guy like Fitzgerald, but he does fit the culture. So it's not a bad option in terms of, if we're saying, hey, who do we think might actually go there? He's definitely looking for a job.
And then can I give you one last one to see the world burn?
Let's go.
Let's say Pitt wins out. They're in the playoffs. Can I interest you in Penn State coach Pat Narduzzi?
I'm gonna throw that one back at you. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, as someone who's wanted to see Narduzzi fired 4 years ago, I say good luck, Pat. Hire Cade Bell as head coach if he leaves. I will say, for as much as I like to say Nardufus, he is one of the top defensive minds in football. Brian Flores spoke highly of him, talking about how his scheme in the NFL is derived of Narduzzi's from his time on the Steelers. Pat does more with less, as much as I hate to say it. Only one or two classes in his career has been in the 20 to 25 range of, rankings for recruits. Normally falls in that 30 to 50 range. And he has Pitt being a contender. Every year I'm believing that they're going to make their way back to that ACC title game. Always good for an upset or two against top ranked opponents, something James Franklin could not do. 59 years old, one last shot at the big time, 72 and 56 record at Pitt, 46 and 36 in conference. If I wasn't so biased, I would kind of say maybe.
Okay. All right. I mean, it's I think Penn State is one of those openings that we've talked about where there's been so many other names that have been thrown out, and then these guys have actually tangibly done something as a result of those rumors that you start to have to consider some of these outliers, if you will, because it's really hard to say which direction they're going right now. But I guess there's probably one guy that would be concerned about his job security if that were to happen, and that would be one Jim Knowles. I doubt he would be kept on the staff if Narduzzi ended up taking that job.
Hey, I mean, if they bought out Franklin, they'll buy out anyone.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Well, I think we've got time for one more on this segment. It is shifting away from maybe these big programs a little bit, but I think it's an intriguing one. Virginia Tech.
How dare
Give me
you
some
disrespect the
names.
Hokies like that, Kyle? Mike Vick did not die for nothing to not be considered Virginia Tech a big program.
Well, you know what? I am waiting for them to bring it back to Beamer ball before I'm
Same.
going to give them
It's the first name I got
their
on there.
due. All right, well, hit me. What are the names here?
I mean, I think Shane Beamer, it's his for the taking. His dad is Frank Beamer. He plays Beamer ball. SEC Coach of the Year last year. Uh, after looking up Shane's bio, I was reminded of the WikiLeaks scandal where Wake Forest gave the plays allegedly to Shane Beamer, who gave it to his dad, and they lose the game 6-3. And we have the incredible meme of Frank Beamer being excited at a 0-0 tie. But I think he's Blacksburg's through and through. It's in his blood. I have a couple other names that I would be interested in sharing, but I think it's Shane's job to take or not take. And he said, I'm happy in South Carolina, but money talks, baby.
Okay. No, I think that's been one of the spots even before Brent Pry lost his job. I think the Beamer rumors were kind of surfacing to the top here. One name I will bring up, and we can talk about it a little bit if it was on your list. If not, then let's just move on. What about James Franklin?
Where else can he go? That's what I have in my wired section. Is like, where else can he go? Maybe UCLA. If he's trying to coach this year, it ain't going to get better than Virginia Tech. And I feel like it's either him. I will also throw out Indiana offense coordinator Mike Shanahan, not the Mike Shanahan, former Pitt receiver, has been a Signetti disciple from his days at IUP, which is Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Elon and James Madison, Virginia school, used to the area. Signetti tells people to Google me. I say the same thing for Shanahan. Top offense is his mind. They're number 2 and number 1 the last 2 years. But we'll focus on James Franklin. I just don't see where else he could go if it's not here.
Yeah. No, I think Franklin, correct me if I'm wrong, has kind of started to surface as one of the main candidates for that role. So it's not really I don't even know if I would consider it a wired one. It's becoming kind of the tired one at this point, if it's not Beamer. So yeah, I think it's a decent fit. I also think that Franklin might be able to compete maybe a little bit better in the ACC. Maybe the expectations there might be a little bit different. I'm not saying that they're necessarily lower. Again, I don't want to disparage the Virginia Tech name twice in one podcast because their
Sounds like you're about
fans are
to.
good. Yeah, well, their fans are good. But I do think with Penn State that there's an expectation that they're going to be in the playoff every year. I mean, they have basically surmounted an expectation similar to that of Ohio State or or Michigan in the conference. And I just wonder whether or not the same thing is truly the case when it comes to Virginia Tech and the ACC.
Yeah, I mean, as much as I said, don't disrespect Virginia Tech. I mean, until they brought up James Franklin's name. That's the first time I thought about Virginia Tech in years. It's just they just kind of fallen into the back and struggled with the guy from Memphis and then firing Brent Fry. It's just it just hasn't been working out. So maybe you get that veteran voice who has that blue blood mentality and experience to right the ship.
Right. Well, Brennan, another shout out to you. Thank you for submitting that question. Sorry it took us 2 weeks to finally cover it, but hopefully you got your money's worth in that we did an entire segment on the question you submitted. So, um, last topic of the pod. This one is, I would say, as close to breaking news as we can give on Cornversations, if only because this information came out earlier this afternoon from when this was recorded. And that is, of course, the landmark change that the MLS, Major League Soccer, is making to its schedule. Starting in 2027, Major League Soccer is going to align itself with the other top leagues in the world. I say other because they want to be there. They're not quite there yet, but the other European leagues are all typically late summer to early to mid spring schedules. The MLS has historically, since 1994 at least, been a league that starts in late February to early March, and its season extends into the late fall period. Um, a couple of things that this does: it aligns the MLS with the global transfer uh, global transfer period. So it's going to be a little bit easier for MLS teams to bring guys in. It's a little bit easier for guys to switch between teams as well, because as opposed to the MLS having their own specific transfer period that doesn't align with everybody else, now they're on the same schedule, which is going to be big for bringing in both the players that they have brought in the past, which are sometimes guys that have finished maybe their competitive playing careers in Europe and are looking for a stopover before they finally entirely call it quits. But the other thing that this does, and this is where I kind of want to get your thoughts, Michael, because I think you had a quote and you can share it with the listeners here after I'm finished introducing this about soccer. But the MLS, especially with their playoffs, because they're currently in the playoff period right now, but we also have a lot going on. We've got college football coming into its critical period of the season. We've got the NFL really ramping up and starting to go into the playoff race. But if you're a casual fan, or maybe not even a fan, a fringe fan, I'll say, of American soccer, that doesn't leave a lot of room to tune into what is essentially the biggest games of the season in the MLS, which is, of course, their playoffs. So my question to you is, does a schedule that allows for you to watch MLS playoffs, so the ability to crown a champion in this league, in mid-April to mid-May, make you more likely to watch soccer as opposed to it being in December when they host the MLS Cup, and that's right in the thick of the college football and pro football seasons here?
Well, I think, to quote the great Kenny Powers here, I hate soccer and I hate when people do it around me. But I do watch the United Soccer League, the level below, for the Pittsburgh Riverhounds, who are one win away from the USL Championship. They play on Saturday, so shout out Hounds. But I think, as someone who doesn't follow soccer, at least MLS soccer, that well, the idea here makes sense from the business side. As like a TV media person, I can only imagine how much more lucrative their contracts could be in the summer, where nothing's happening, where you're not competing with football, you're not competing with FIFA's international breaks. All of that is in the summer is just baseball. So now you got that time. You'll be on Sports Center regularly. You'll have people going out having a nice day, being like, "Let's hit the soccer match in the summer." And I think that's basically the business side of it making sense. But the one thing I like, which I wasn't aware of until this was happening, is that they are changing to a single table system, and one that incorporates 5 divisions and two rather than 2 conferences. So every team plays once, which I'm like, if you're a pro sports league, every team should play each other once. That way fans can see all players, all teams. It just makes so much sense. I mean, from what I'm reading after you told me about this again, like I didn't even hear about this until you brought it up to me. It seems like all the teams are about it. They're very excited. They think that this is going to take the league to the next step forward. And are you a fan of it? Is there a proposal that you like? Are there things you don't like about it? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, when I originally saw the announcement that it was likely to pass, they took the vote on it on Thursday of this week. I saw that it was likely to pass the day earlier. And originally, when I saw that, I was like, okay, well, one of the downsides, one of the drawbacks of adjusting the season so that you're playing these games in November, you're playing these games in January, February, is that you're going to be playing some cold weather games in certain markets. And, we're both in them. So we know it as well as anybody that it is sometimes a miserable experience, even when you are at a sporting event, if you are bundled up and it is 30 degrees and sleeting out. And that was my original thought was, okay, this might be bad because you have a situation where, a lot of the games that they play under the current format are in the summer. And yeah, it's hot, but there's a difference between being a little bit warm as opposed to having your beer freeze on you mid game because it's that cold. And I've been there before. And the more that I thought about it, though, I think you make a good point. It's not competing with the other, major events as far as global soccer is concerned. It is a situation where, yes, I mean, there are going to be some cold games in markets like Philadelphia and New York and Columbus and Seattle. But for the months of, July, August, September, October, when they're still playing, those are pretty nice games. And then on top of that, the playoffs right now are also during the cold months, so you can still run into it during some of the biggest games of the year. Whereas under this format that they're gonna shift to, you're playing the biggest games in April and May, so it's probably going to be better weather for the biggest games that people are going to see. And the last thing I'll point out, and you kind of touched on it a little bit as a media guy, another thing that they're doing here is they are scaling back the barriers to watching these games. So the MLS did have a package with Apple TV. You used to have to buy something called MLS Season Pass, which was a subscription in addition to Apple TV in order to watch games throughout the season. And now you're only going to need to have Apple TV in order to watch the games. So no more MLS Season Pass, no more essentially blocking out people that are probably on the fence about watching the games to begin with. So I agree with you. I think it's going to be a boon for their ability to bring eyeballs to the sport without having to basically use the name Lionel Messi in order to try to get people to buy yet another subscription package.
Oh, I mean, I think that's the biggest issue facing all teams. I talked to a buddy this weekend, had everyone together to uh, for he's having a child. He just had this week, and last weekend out with the boys watching college football. We're talking about the YouTube and ESPN issue. He's like, "What streaming service do you use?" I'm like, "I don't use any. I sell the C's now. Like, I'm back on my pirating game because it's just too much to maintain, so much to pay for. It's just like, if they could only bundle this all together and call it something like cable where you can watch all the sports, it'd be perfect. But, I think that's going to be a big factor in part of this decision making is, how does it impact the fan? But, at the end of the day, as long as they get paid, they don't care.
Yeah, I mean, we might have to have you back because I'm sure that topic that you just mentioned is going to come up again. We've covered it in a few episodes in the past as
Oh, yeah. Last we touched on it real well, hit all the main points.
yeah, yeah, and I think especially you're talking about the MLS here, right? I made the comment and I did it tongue in cheek because some people hate this, but fifth major American sport. This is not a big four here. This is not a league that can afford to take a big risk on, hey, we're going to try to make the revenue on the subscriptions in exchange for maybe losing out on some people. They're still very much in the mode of needing as many eyeballs as possible, including those casuals that might tune in once or twice. So I think this is great for that.
I mean, I think you're spot on with that. I mean, look at Messi. It was the biggest deal for 3 weeks, and then now I haven't heard Lionel Messi's name once in the last 2 years. And I think what you see in Phoenix for the Suns and a couple other teams, I think Vegas of the Golden Knights is one. they're literally sending people antennas and saying, "Hey, here's a free antenna. Watch our games over the air on channel 3 or whatever it is." And you're building that relationship right then and there. You're getting the viewers, they'll buy jerseys, they'll buy tickets, and that's how you build fans.
Right. Right. It is not a situation where people are going to seek you out if you're the MLS. I think it is a situation where you very much need to put yourself in front of people in order to continue the momentum that they have built over the years, but they are still a long way to go before they're going to get to where they want to be. However, I think this is a really big step in that right direction. But I think that's a really good spot to end. So, Michael, I really appreciate you joining on today. I think this was a good discussion. Hopefully, listeners out there, you guys thought it was a good discussion as well. Be sure to comment on your favorite platform. Let us know what you thought. Send some things to the mailbag, cornversationspod@gmail.com. That is what this is all about, is the interaction. Any parting thoughts before we sign off here,
I
Michael?
need your prediction of the Pitt Notre Dame game. I'm asking all the homies. You're the
You're asking
college
all the
football
homies.
savant, the oracle of college sports. I need to know what your thoughts are.
Yeah. I'm giving away a little bit from the Around the Corn sports blog post here, but I'll give the score. I think it is going to be close. I've got 34-28 Notre Dame. I don't think that I don't think they cover the spread, but I think they are going to get the job done.
I respect it. I got Notre Dame 110, Pitt 10.
All right. Well, that's an excellent spot to end on. Well, Michael, thank you again. Everybody, thank you for listening. And until next time, take it easy, Shuckers.